Lynn, are you there? Yes. Thank you. I'd like to welcome you all to another Spotlight on Literacy event. We've had so much fun doing this, and as Arissa said, we're going into our second year. So we thank you for coming, whether this is your first one or your 12th one. We are thrilled today to have two speakers for our presentation to talk about the American History Book Awards that NSDAR gave this year. And Arissa has made this contact for us. And so I would like to introduce Arissa to you so she can introduce you to the rest of our program. And thank you for joining us. We appreciate it so much.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Like Allison alluded to, we are here tonight with two amazing authors, Kevin Weddle, correct me if I'm wrong, and Tara Ross. They're going to be talking to us about their books. Kevin writes adult historical books, and Tara won for the Children's Book Award. And you might be wondering, oh great, a book award. I have no idea anything about it. So the Excellence in American History Book Award is given out each year for an adult book and a children's book focusing on the Federalist period by the DAR under the auspices of the Historian General's office. So at the end, after we hear from our authors, we're going to go a little more into how you can nominate a great book you've read to be eligible for this award next year. And this time next year could be your people. But I wanted to kick it over to Kevin and Tara to talk a little bit about their books. Kevin, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your book, The Compleat Victory? Sorry, my French.
No, it's complete victory, but yeah, thank you, Arissa. So thank you very much. Number one, it was really an honor to win this year's award, and I want to congratulate Tara for winning her award in the children's category. And Arissa, thank you so much for setting all this up. This is great. Really looking forward to this. A little bit about me. I'm a Minnesota native, so I don't know if there's any Minnesotans out there. So Wisconsin, so that's close, but I'm a Minnesotan. I went to West Point and served 29 years on active duty as a combat engineer officer, retired as a colonel. I served in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and Enduring Freedom, and I commanded a combat engineer battalion. I served at the Pentagon and DIA and places like that. And then I ended up at the U.S. Army War College as the deputy dean, and then I became professor of military theory and strategy at the War College. So, and that's if you've never heard of the War College, most people haven't. That's in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and right now I am a distinguished fellow. Oh,
since being shot. Bulletproof glass in front of the podium and.
Can everybody hear me? I don't know if.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I'm sorry. I thought I was on mute there for a second. I thought that, boy, I've just spent a lot of time and nobody's hearing me. Anyway, so I'm currently a distinguished fellow at the Army War College. So my book, The Complete Victory, Saratoga and the American Revolution, obviously I can't distill a 500-page book into a couple minutes, but basically, it's about one of the most pivotal campaigns in American history, and arguably one of the most important turning points of the American Revolution. And you're probably familiar with the basic outlines of the Saratoga campaign, but basically the British, after failing to destroy Washington's army in 1776, were determined to end the war in 1777. So they embarked on a very complex, ambitious campaign to basically split off the New England colonies away from the rest of the new United States, and they wanted to do that by coming down from Canada, take control of the Hudson River Valley, Lake Champlain, Lake George, and then ultimately, of course, they were finally defeated, surrounded, and forced to surrender by American Major General Horatio Gates at Saratoga. So it was critically important because the British, of course, lose an entire army, which was a huge shock to them. And of course, the most important thing, the thing that everybody, of course, knows about is it convinced the French to come in on the war on our side. So, when you look at all the various books that have been written about Saratoga, and there's been many, many books written about Saratoga, and many of them are really, really good. I think mine is different for a couple reasons. One, it covers the entire campaign. So most authors kind of focus on those final climactic two battles at the end of the campaign, the Battle of Freeman Farm and the Battle of Bemis Heights. But I look at the entire campaign. There were a total of 11 battles and engagements over the course of 5 months, hundreds and hundreds of square miles. It was one of the longest campaigns actually in American military history. So I talked about the whole thing, the whole campaign, to include the lead up and the the aftermath, all the political, strategic, diplomatic issues around that. I'm actually mainly a Civil War historian. But I've always been interested in the American Revolution, and of course, being going to school at West Point, you're surrounded by Revolutionary War history. So I became very interested in the American Revolution during that period of my life, and then later I came back to teach at West Point. So all of that really led me to a lot of interest in that. And Oxford University Press approached me to write this volume of their Pivotal Moments in American History series. And of course, you can't have a list of pivotal moments in American history and not include the Saratoga campaign. Arissa asked us to talk about how we approach the research, and I'll just talk about just a couple seconds, and then I'll turn it over to Tara. But you hear a lot of people who are writing a book on history saying that, well, first I read every secondary source I can find on whatever subject it is. I don't do that. What I do is I make sure I know the basic chronology, all the basic characters, and then I dig into the primary sources. So my book is almost all primary sources. And so I did a lot of work in libraries and archives in the US and the UK, especially the David Library of the American Revolution, which unfortunately now has moved to Philadelphia. It makes it a little bit harder to get to. The Clements Library at the University of Michigan, which holds a lot of, believe it or not, British leader papers. And the Army Heritage and Education Center, which is here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and also went to the British Library. But the other thing I did is walk the ground. I walked every square inch of the Saratoga campaign for the most part, and several times I did it a bunch of times. And that was very pleasurable. I love doing that sort of thing. I love tromping around battlefields. The most challenging part of this whole thing, I think, was because there was so much going on, and so much of the things that were going on are happening at the same time. My big challenge, I think, was to make sense of it all to the reader, so the reader wouldn't get lost. And I'm not sure if I was able to accomplish that, but that was certainly part of my goal. And the other thing I think is, mainly because of my personal interests, there are two threads that kind of weave themselves throughout the book, and that's military strategy and leadership. So that's a basic thumbnail of my book and kind of how I approached it. So let me turn it over to Tara.
Well, thank you. I want to echo everything Kevin started out saying. I'm so grateful and flattered for the award. I congratulate Kevin on his award as well. It was honestly a complete shock to me. I knew I'd been nominated, but I was just like, yeah, no, it's not going to happen. But it did. So thank you guys. I appreciate it. To introduce myself to everybody, I'm a retired lawyer. I originally started writing actually because I wrote several books on the Electoral College. A funny story, the reason I wrote my first book about the Electoral College is actually because I got in a car wreck. I was in a taxi cab in the back seat, not wearing a seatbelt, and I broke my arm because my then boyfriend, now husband, grabbed me to keep me from flying out the door, and I ended up with a broken arm. That was my last semester of law school, and so I could no longer take notes in class anymore because I had broken my writing arm. So I decided to do an independent study on the Electoral College, which would let me type out things instead of write things. This was in the spring of 2001. I picked the Electoral College for no reason at all, except that it seemed really easy at the time because there was so much information. I ended up learning how much I did not know about the Electoral College, even though I thought I did. And I won't go on and on about the Electoral College because that's not why we're here. But I learned a lot. And that is how I got started in writing. I wrote a book about the Electoral College. Fast forward a couple years, I worked with a co-author to write a book about George Washington and his views on church and state. And then I did a second edition of the Electoral College book. And around that time, I became a mom. And so I decided, you guys all know what happens to your time when you become a mom. So I decided I was going to start writing this history blog, and I would just do a daily post every day, this day in history. And it started off pretty small, maybe a paragraph, this day in history. And I don't even know how it happened. I'm just being honest, probably because I'm a perfectionist or something, but it turned into a much longer. Now I limit myself to no more than I think it's 4,000 characters or something like this, which amounts to 600 something words for each daily post. They run every weekday. And I've been doing that for about a decade now, and actually a little bit more than a decade because my son's about to turn 13. So, that's just kind of how I got started on this road, shifting away from the Electoral College and towards history. And I wrote a book I did a kid's book about the Electoral College in 2016. And that was mostly because I knew that I knew enough to do it. And no offense to anybody, but I think a lot of people who write about the Electoral College are law professors or something, and they're not going to write a book about a kid's book about the Electoral College. So I decided to do it. And I did it. And it was stunningly difficult to write a kid's book about the Electoral College because you have to think very hard about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. You don't want to compromise nuances just because you were trying to put it into kids' language. But so, how do you make it detailed enough, but not too detailed? And I worked on that for a while. And I think and hope it turned out pretty well. This whole time I've still been writing these daily history posts. And so that first kids book was so fun to write. I really enjoyed writing that kids book. And so I decided to do a different one. This one was about American Revolutionary War heroines. And it was just 16 double-page spreads, one on each girl. And they were just people I had already featured in a history spotlight on my blog that I'd been running at that point for several years. And so that one was well received. And it was fun. And what I was beginning to discover, several things. One is that people, I think, actually learn more from kids' books sometimes than adult books. And it's because they will read it with their kids at night, or they will as a bedtime story or whatever. And so I realized that if I keep doing kids' books, I reach both parents and kids. And so I decided, right now, I'm just kind of on a permanent kids track, just to tell you the truth. So then I was trying to decide of another idea, and I was talking to my daughter, and she had just taken American history fairly recently in school, and we were just talking about it. And I was trying to figure out how could I present something different that nobody else had done? And if you look at most of the kids' books about the American Revolution, they are either very brief and no detail, like George Washington, hooray, good guy. And that's it, they're done, or else it's so detailed, it might as well be an adult book and there's no kid that's going to pick it up. So it was actually my daughter's idea to use the same double-page spread that I had used for the Revolutionary War heroines book, but turn it into one about the American Revolution in general. And so that's what I ended up doing. I picked 16 different highlights of the American Revolution, things that I felt like every kid should know. And I literally just did one double-page spread on each of them. So the first double-page spread is the Stamp Act. I don't call it the Stamp Act. I think I said Great Britain gets bossy. So I tried to make it fun for kids to read. And I think that the book is too hard for some of the younger ones just to sit down and do in one reading, but it's easy enough that they could say, I'm going to do the Stamp Act tonight before I go to bed. And tomorrow we'll do the Boston Tea Party before we go to bed. And over the course of 2 weeks, you would read it to your kid, one per night, and they would end up with an overview of the American Revolution. And maybe they wouldn't remember every single last detail, but they don't need to. They just need to remember the main points and have a starting place to work from later. Each double-page spread is written in, I believe it's about fourth grade level ish, third or fourth grade level ish. There's also something called a fun fact corner on every page, so the older kids can learn things like Paul Revere never finished his famous ride. Somebody else had to do it for him. And so I just try to put more fun things like that in there. So again, I'm happy with how it turned out. I think you guys asked for research to discuss how we do our research. I think mine has just been the process of doing this history blog over the course of a decade. When I wrote the book, I did again spend a lot of time thinking about how do I write this for kids, not for adults. I did recheck everything, you know, I mean, I try to be very, very factual on my blog, but I rechecked all of it again, everywhere 10 times to make sure that I had it right. I agree with Kevin. I much prefer to rely on primary sources. I always will if I can. But if not, then I look for secondary sources that are heavily footnoted so I know where they got their information. I want to know. I don't want to just cite some random blog somewhere. For future projects, I'm thinking about trying to get another kids book out in time for America's 250th birthday. I'm debating the topic. I might do one on the Constitution, maybe just try to do the same thing I did with the Electoral College, just to simplify it down so that our kids can have an introduction into what separation of powers and checks and balances and what's the executive, what's the judiciary, what are these things and why did we create our Constitution there? So I might do that. And I think that the double page spread has been successful enough that I probably would just do the same thing again and just say, here's the 16 concepts I want people to know and just hit them one after the other. But
that's a great thing for people who aren't
yeah.
aware of working with picture books. You are in a very specific length usually. Picture books are almost always the exact like 32 pages, 28. If you don't mind, I'll add one shout out to my illustrator. She is wonderful. She did the illustrations for the Electoral College book when she was still a senior in high school. But we have worked together every time. Now she's married to a military guy, and she's done a wonderful, beautiful job, and she is on board with the next one. So I'm looking forward to teaming up with her again. That is so cool. Kevin, do you want to share a little bit about what you're hoping to do next, or maybe you're already working on it?
Yeah, I actually am already working on it. It's haven't gotten too far yet, but it's and this one isn't going to take me 15 years like the last one. But no, it's I'm going to stick. I was thinking of going back to the Civil War, but I'm going to stick with the American Revolution. It's going to be a George Washington plays a big role in my Saratoga book. I think it's the first time anybody's kind of looked at his role in Saratoga, and it was a central role. And what I want to do is look at his growth as a commander-in-chief over the course of the war. Basically how he learned how to be a commander-in-chief over the course of the war, the mistakes he made, how he learned from those mistakes, and so forth. So it's not going to be a biography. But it's basically his growth as evolution as a commander-in-chief over the course of the war. So it's going to be with Oxford University Press again. We're going to try to get it out, sometime in the middle of the 250th commemorations.
Yeah, my hope is someone who obviously is a reader as well as a librarian and a DAR member is like, where's my publication schedule? I need these people publishing. Where's your American Revolution books? Like Lori Halls Anderson has a 1776 book coming out. And I was like, keep on schedule. You got to hurry. Come on. We're ready to read it. This is the time, So it's great to hear that you both are working on those. Speaking of that work process, what do you find is the hardest part about writing, specifically nonfiction for your respective audiences about the American Revolution? Is it primary resources and reading calligraphy? Is it misconceptions people have? Is it selling to a publisher? Like, what do you find is the hardest part about that writing process? Or the easiest, if you want to be positive too.
Well, I will say, when I was working on the George Washington book, I thought it was incredibly difficult to weed out fact from fiction. George Washington may be a particular problem in that regard because so much was written about him, and the way the biographers worked in the years, early 1800s or whatever, it was an accepted style almost to write in an exaggerated fashion, So hence the cherry tree story or the I cannot tell a lie, or some of the things like whether he did or didn't kneel in the snow to pray, probably not. Even something as simple as did he add in God or so help me God to the end of the presidential oath. There's no primary source that says that. Maybe he did, but there's not a primary source. And so Mount Vernon just says it's kind of unknown, like maybe he did, maybe he didn't. So I think I just try really hard to be diligent and to, like I said, anytime I can find a primary source, I will do it. I did end up at the Library of Congress one time, literally with crumbling like Virginia legislative records in my hands. I mean, like, I don't know why they let me have that. I don't think they should have, but they did. And so, but I think you just have to persevere and ask all the questions. Don't assume anything. Likewise with George Washington, there was something about like having a day of Thanksgiving, and they were going to fire the whatever. I'm not a weapons expert, but they were going to fire one of the weapons. But again, don't assume anything. Like, don't assume they're firing bullets. I didn't assume they're firing bullets. I ended up on the phone with a historian who does focus on that kind of detail. And we just had a conversation about like, what would they have done? Were they really wasting bullet, or whatever, gunpowder on that stuff? Were they really doing that? And the answer might be no, but it's just, but that's important, right? Because if he was using gunpowder, that's an important statement on what he thought about using gunpowder that was scarce already for public displays of respect to God. So anyway, that's my experience. I just think you just have to dig and dig and dig and persevere. I am a lawyer, as I mentioned, so it probably does help me to know what questions to ask and when to not just assume there's, not to leap to assumptions that are incorrect.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really that's excellent, Tara. I totally agree with you. And I'm not a lawyer, but I am an engineer, recovering engineer. So I also have that sort of, make sure everything is correct. And so what I found over the course of my research is very similar to what you did. There were so many books on Saratoga that repeated stories that were just too good to check. And they were these great stories. And I found after really digging in that a lot of them, number one, just couldn't be proven. As you said, there was absolutely no sources that would say that, or clearly it wasn't correct. But just historians had seen it in a book, and they said, wow, that's a great story. And they footnoted that book, but where did that guy get it? And where did that guy, and so, I probably dispelled or at least questioned, I don't know, 8, 9 myths about the Saratoga campaign over the course of my research. So yeah, absolutely. It's the digging. And that can be a lot of fun, as well as hard. But when you get to the point where you say, you're making a conclusion and saying, well, we can't say that. But it may have been, And so you need to tell the reader that, and you need to make sure the reader understands that, yes, all these other books say that happened, but really, we can't say that. It may have happened, it may not have happened. Or it may not have had the impact that they claim it did, or whatever. So that's absolutely true. The other thing I think is a real challenge with the American Revolution is getting those primary sources, and they're all over the place. I mean, fortunately, a lot of them now are digitized, so that helps a lot, but you still have to go to archives. You still have to dig in the archives. As I mentioned, the Clements Library at University of Michigan has this huge, probably the best collection of British senior officers. You'd think it'd be in the UK, wouldn't you? No, it's in the University of Michigan. And that stuff isn't digitized. So if you want that stuff, you gotta go there, and you gotta dig through it and spend days and days and days doing that. So you just have to do that, and a lot of things are easier now with things that are digitized and published primary sources, but you still have to dig in the archives. And the other thing, I think, especially for somebody who's writing a book about a military campaign, is I really think you have to walk the ground. You have to be on the ground and see it, because I don't care how many maps you look at. I don't care how many great descriptions you read of the terrain and whatnot. you don't have a really good appreciation unless you go on the ground. I mean, for instance, where I'm sitting right now, I'm 30 miles north of Gettysburg. And as a Civil War historian, I take all sorts of, students from the War College. I take all sorts of groups down to Gettysburg and give them tours. And before I went to Gettysburg the first time, I'd read all about the battle, and I've read about Missionary Ridge and Cemetery Ridge. And as a Midwesterner from Minnesota, I think of a ridge as a very tall, cliff-like, geographical feature. I get to Gettysburg and I see Cemetery Ridge. It's just a little tiny fold in the ground. But yet it gave a huge advantage to whoever controlled it. But so until you go there and you see it, it's really important. So I think for an author who's writing about a military campaign, you got to walk the ground, and it takes a lot of time and effort, but it's well worth it.
Those are all great points. I especially like what you talked about with like that fact versus fiction, and like we can't say it happened. When I was in grad school, worked as a fact check reporter, and my specialty was spurious quotations. And if you look for them, you'll find that almost every major like presidential, like the Jefferson, Monticello, Mount Vernon, Montpelier, all have what they call like spurious quotation pages. And it's basically like, yeah, this is always attributed to them, but we can't prove they said it. And I will tell you, my fact checks were published on the internet. So I still, 7 years later, get Facebook messages primarily from random people who my fact check is then like attributed to theirs on Facebook. We are a Facebook fact checking partner. So it's like they share a quote that's like, George Washington said, always wash your linens or whatever, and it gets a fact check. And in my fact check, I'm basically like, there is no documented proof that he said this, right? We cannot find where he said it, therefore blank. And they love to be like, well, you can't prove he didn't say it. And I'm like, well, you can't prove he did say it. And it's like a very like infuriating sort of like, you can't just say someone like, you would not be happy if someone said that about you, right? That, well, you can't disprove that you said it, because it's like, oh, do you have secret George Washington papers that we don't have? Are you communing with him in your dreams? Like, where are you getting this from? So it's a very, I think, founding fathers and like these really big, it's almost always men, of like thought. It's very much like, well, you can't prove he didn't say it. Wouldn't it be great if he did? And I'm like, I'm sure it would be. And for many of the George Washington ones, you're like, that does sound wise, doesn't it? But he did not say it. At least if he did, he whispered it to a guy, And if you trace these, you can often find they like very much came up in the 20th century. And it's like, you think they just knew him and they knew he'd said this on a Tuesday? Very fascinating. So fact checking, very hard. Do you all want to take questions from the audience for a few minutes? See if anyone has questions about your writing process, your books in particular. If you want, you can come off mute, raise a hand. I'll try to call on you. The hand function is now under React. If you're a long time Zoomer, first time caller, it used to be separate and now it's under React. Allison, do you have any questions? Oh, Helen. We'll start with Helen.
Thank you so much. Tara, I just wanted to tell you I am the state chair for the Literacy Promotion Committee in Montana. And we do have a member of Bitterroot chapter on this presentation, and they're the ones that sponsored you for this award.
Yay!
So we're very proud of Montana
Yay.
and Bitterroot. Laura?
Yay. Thank you so much for nominating me.
You
I
want to
really
come off of
appreciate it.
mute and say something? Laura? There she comes. There you go.
What to say, but I've been reading Tara's blog and I saw the book come out and I was just, yes, that's what I'm doing. So
Thanks so much.
yeah,
It's good to see your face. I've mostly seen you over email.
yeah, no, I'm so glad that we could do it.
And we'll talk
Well, I
more about how
appreciate
you
it.
can be like Bitterroot at the end. How you can be here next year being like, that's my guy. That's my girl. You all touched a little bit on it, but how you got into writing and publishing. Are there any like weird things that happened in your publishing journey that like, or was it kind of a natural like academic pursuit? And then we'll go to Delane.
Well,
I mean, I say you go ahead.
Oh, no, Tara, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I feel like all of my books have come out in a kind of weird way. So I'm not even sure where to start with that. I wrote the first Electoral College book in 4 months, which was incredibly difficult. I had written a law review article about it already, and I was planning to publish the law review article. And then it was 2004, and it's kind of a long story, but I was writing a chapter in a different book, and one of the editors at the company read it, and he was like, "You've got 4 months. If you can turn it into a book, go." And I was like, "All right, sure, I can. Sure. How hard can this be?" It was really hard, and I didn't sleep much. But and I swore I would never ever do that again. But of course, after that Trump mess in 2016, when everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, you know, he didn't win the popular vote. Is this fair?" And then I ended up doing the same thing all over again because Regnery called me and said, "Can you please write something?" And so I did. But it was easier that time because I knew the subject so well by then.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of academics, you like kind of fall into it, you know? Kevin?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really consider myself an academic. I consider myself a, you know, an Army officer, but I had an assignment at West Point to teach military history. So while I was at grad school, I wrote my first article about, believe it or not, a Civil War general who was also a famous American astronomer. So it kind of combined my love of history of science and engineering with my love of military history. So that was for a astronomy magazine, believe it or not. And so that kind of got me going. But I published a couple small articles, and then my first book was on a Civil War admiral, but basically a biography of a Civil War admiral, Admiral DuPont of the DuPont family, those DuPonts. And that's what got Oxford University Press interested in asking me to write this book on Saratoga. So I'm sort of an accidental academic. But again, I don't like to call myself an academic, actually. But
Kevin, your book is 500 pages long of history.
it
Surprise,
is.
an
It
academic.
is. It is a doorstop, and that's actually a bit of a story too. My editor, if you're familiar with the Pivotal Moments of American History series of Oxford University Press, most of them, not all, most of them are fairly short. They're meant to be kind of concise descriptions or narratives of, you know, whatever that famous historical event was. And it didn't take me long when I started the research to realize that if I wanted to write a book on the entire campaign, there was no way it was going to be a short book. And I convinced my editor to let me let me go. The first draft was actually double the size. Yeah. So I needed to take a big appetite suppressant, but luckily I had a very understanding, patient editor.
Delane, you had a question? Yep, you are on mute. I see you're working on it.
Sorry. So
No
I
worries.
know that Kevin's book is The Complete Victory. Is that correct? The title?
Mhm.
Well, I didn't get Tara's title of her book.
Tara?
Here, it's right here. It's We Fought for Freedom, the story of our American Revolution.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Any other questions from the audience? Sorry.
I want to ask both of you.
Yeah.
What is your writing process? Do you take lots of notes and then write, or do you write in spurts? Do you write late at night? Do you write during the daytime? Do you write while you're in the car? What do you do?
I'll jump on that grenade first, Tara, and then turn it over to you. So I like to do the vast majority of my research first. I'm old-fashioned. I put all my notes on note cards so I can play with them and manipulate them. You know, I have it all on computer, but I actually print out the note cards and I, you know, put them in order and, you know, all that based on my outline. And then when I finish what I think is, you know, the vast majority of my research, then I'll write. And I write fast, but it's awful, the first draft. But I get a lot of words down, and then I'll go back and revise. And then I'll also see where there's gaps, and if I need to do more research, I'll do that. But I'd like to do the vast bulk of my research first and then write. And I find that if I really, I can't write in spurts, so I can't, I'm going to dedicate Tuesday to writing, and then I'll get back to it next Wednesday. I can't do that. I need to write in, long periods, extended periods, and dedicate, half the day at least to writing. And I find that I write very fast and I can get a lot down. So that's my process.
I'm similar. When I did the adult books, I am right there with the note cards. I did all the research. They were all in note cards, put them in the piles, whatever, just like they taught you in middle school. Make your outline, put your little number. This is, section X, A, small a, like all of it. And then, I have the reference, like, where did I get it? It's in this is where it is in the outline. This is where it is in the sources. And that way you can drop a footnote real quick while you're there, even if it's just sloppy, but that way you can go clean it back up later. And I have been very much that way always when I'm doing adult books. The kids' books, I've done a little differently. And I still have an outline. I don't know, I wrangled a lot with which 16 events to put into the American Revolution book. And so I don't know, I kept on going back and forth, but I had my outline before I started. I knew I was going to do these 16 events. And then I just worked on one section at a time. And I tend to just, since again, it's pretty short because it's a kid's book. So just, these are the bullet points I want to make sure I hit on this page. And I just have them actually on the page. And as I write, I get to it, knock it out, knock it out like that. Yeah, I would love to say before I had kids, I would just immerse myself and write for very long periods of time. That doesn't happen for me anymore. So I definitely have to just figure out how to work in spurts. But honestly, when you're doing the kids book, that part does make it easier because it could just be something like, I'm just going to do the fun fact corner right now because I've got 2 hours and that's what I'm going to do. And so that part has definitely changed for me a lot. And I suspect I will probably flip back to the other one. My daughter's going to college and my son's gonna be right behind her. So I have a feeling I'll be flipping back, but it is relaxed. I will say it's relaxing for me to write. I think people who are not writers, it's not relaxing. It's like a chore. To me, it really can really de-stress me a lot just to sit at my desk and got my cup of coffee. And I'm just like in my favorite chair and I'm just kind of typing. And the other thing I wanted to add is similar to what Kevin said. In my mind, it's like if I were a sculptor and I had this marble thing in front of me, and I imagine sculptors must just kind of take us like, okay, the head's in that vicinity, the arms over there kind of, but like it doesn't really look like the thing to anybody except the artist for a while. And then he takes another swipe and another swipe. And by the time you're on like this, 8th or 9th or 10th swipe, it's like, oh, you got the detail of the nose and you got so to me, like Kevin said, like anything you get down, it's the first swipe. Okay, yeah, I know the head's over there somewhere, So that's it. In my mind, that's how it looks to me on paper. And I always just say, just get down your dirty draft first. It's fine. You'll fix it later. But I do enjoy it. And I know that's not true for everybody. But I would hate doing the art. And I'm sure the sculptor gets really relaxed, doing all that stuff.
Exactly. Everyone, their talent group. Brittany had a question in the chat about your favorite record group to read through for each of your books. Brittany, do you mean like?
What's a record group?
Yeah, I was like, Brittany, what do you mean by record group? I can make one guess, but you mean like, yes, pension records of the National Archives, 1972, or we'll give her a second to respond. Pensions, newspapers. Okay, great. Where do you go for your sources, kind of? Yeah. Or do you have a preference? Do you find that like for kids' books, maybe newspapers are more interesting or letters versus government things? Or
yeah, to me, it totally depends on the subject. On the history blog, I do like Medal of Honor Mondays. And so then you're always going to the military records, but I like to have personal details and you're not going to find those there. So I actually do go to newspapers.com, but they have digitized all those newspapers. And I just go looking for interviews. What did their mom say? What did their dad say? What did their favorite uncle say or whatever? And so, but if it was something like writing about the American Revolution, I'd be much more likely to go to just letters that were written by George Washington or whoever. I do like to go to someone, if I'm doing a deep dive on something, maybe somebody who was like, I would go to Kevin's book for Saratoga. It's on my list. I'm going to read it. But I would do that for background. I'd probably still not trust everything I read. Not you, Kevin, but just in general. I always double check everything, because people are sloppy sometimes. You just don't know. So if I would read a book on the subject, but then I would go look at their footnotes and say, where did they get that information? And I think Kevin said this earlier. And if they're citing somebody else who wrote a book about the thing, so I go to that book. Where did they get that? And I try to figure it out. But the answer to the specific source question is it totally depends on the subject, because I think different sources are good for different things. And there's no one source that's good for everything.
Kevin, do you want to disagree and say there is one best source and it's your favorite?
No, I once again, I agree with Tara, but my preference, I just love digging through letters and diaries and journals and things like that. Even again, if you're writing about military history like I do, and you're also reading a lot of the official record kind of stuff. So the general who writes his after action report after a battle, or the minister in Britain, in London, sending his instructions to the British commander-in-chief in New York City, things like that. And writing the Saratoga campaign, maybe this is going to sound a little sacrilegious, but I am such an Anglophile that I just loved reading through the British primary sources, because the British had a really tough, it was a really tough job that they had to try to put down this rebellion militarily, and they were kind of floundering around and just reading through that, and you put yourself, as a military person, putting yourself in their shoes, going, how would I have gone about this? It was a really hard task for them, and so I found myself actually having a little bit of sympathy for what they were going through. So I just loved reading those first person accounts, either, as I said, the journals or letters, and the more contemporaneous, the best, of course.
Of course. All right, we've got time for about one more question before we move into talking about nominations for the award. Does anyone have a last question, inquiry?
I have one question for Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
I know you said that your publisher wanted you to do about half the length of what you actually did. How did you decide what to take out? Because you spent so much time collecting all your research.
Yeah. Well, he gave me a little bit of help with that, reading through the draft and telling, I was really fortunate. I had one of the best editors in the business at Oxford. He's edited Pulitzer Prize winners and all sorts of things. I don't know how I got him, luck of the draw, I guess. But, he gave me some really good advice going along. And the one of the best pieces of advice he gave me was show, not tell. In other words, you don't have to spoon feed the reader. And I think I was doing some of that. And maybe because I'm also, I was a professor at the War College, he would read through some of my stuff and say, it sounds like you're teaching a class here. You don't want to do that. There's no problem having some analysis of what you're, talking about, but get rid of all that kind of stuff. So it was really good advice, and I took that to heart, and that was a lot of the stuff that I cut out. And I just had probably way too much fluff in there that I got rid of. So it's 500 word or 500 pages, but it's a pretty lean 500 pages actually. Because again, remember, it was a 5-month campaign. I'm talking about a total of about 3 years of the war, 77, and then of course the tail end and the front end of that as well. So There's a lot going on in the book, so it's actually a fairly lean 500 pages, if you can imagine a lean 500 pages.
Okay.
Tara,
Thank
did you have a similar issue with your picture books? Because I know going like I work in picture books primarily right now, and every author is like, I had too many words. There were not enough spreads in the spread.
Sorry, I lost my mute button there for a second. Yeah, I don't know. To me, that's just part of the yes, definitely. I ended up with way too many lines on some things and I had to cut it down. And I guess you just start thinking about what's important or not important, or thinking about whether you can use a different on an illustrated book, you could save 2 characters and like it brings it up the whole line and you got, much more room that way. I messed with the formatting. I didn't format my own book, but I had it on my screen pretty much exactly like I was going to pass it up to the graphics person. And so I had a pretty good idea of what would and wouldn't fit. And yeah, but to me, I said to me, it's like a sculpture before, like where you just keep messing around until it looks like it's supposed to. So to me, it wasn't stressful or anything. I just knew I needed to make it fit.
Yeah. Like it will happen. I just have to get there. Yeah. Very much.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Before we move into discussing the award in general, let's all give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Their books are available online. I've provided the links, and I will send that out as well in our post wrap up and in the DOC if you would like to order. I think I saw Tara's book in the DAR store. I'm not sure about Kevin's yet. I don't know. They were in the middle of inventorying things, so I don't know how much was moving around. But if those links are available as well, I will share them. So thank you all so much. And now we're going to think about how you can be in this spot next year, having your award or having your nominee be up here, because we will do this again. I've just already decided it, sorry, next year. So this is technically 2 different awards, but 2 sides of the same coin. So we have the NSDAR Excellence in American History Book Award, and we have the NSDAR Excellence in American History Children's Book Award. You can guess what the difference is, right? One is for children and one is not. So I'm just going to review. The criteria is mostly the same, and then I'll provide these links in the chat as well. So for the Children's Book Award, the purpose is to recognize distinguished historical literary works of nonfiction and or biographies that have made a substantial contribution to children's literature. As someone who works in picture books, I will tell you, you might often feel conflicted about whether something is nonfiction or not, especially in picture books. It can be hard to be certain if something is being billed as nonfiction or not. The best way is to check the publisher page, but also if you're reading it and it has back matter, if it has sources in the back, it is probably going to qualify for this award, especially if it's a picture book biography. The eligibility and the criteria include it must be a historical nonfiction or biography. Again, what that means to children's books is a little different. It must be focused on American history from the early colonial period, 1607 landing at Jamestown, through the Federalist period, 1801, Jefferson's first inauguration. So that's why it's important that it's a DAR Book Award, right? It's not the Caldecott, it's not the Newbery, it's a DAR Excellence in American History Book Award. If Kevin wrote the best book on the Civil War ever, too bad it's not winning this award. It can go win all the other awards, right? It needs to be written in English. I think this was primarily because while I'm sure Mrs. Heskey is very literate in other things, I'm not sure if she's reads Spanish or Mandarin or French. This is the big one, and it's bolded for a reason. It must be published within the past 5 years. So this often comes up, and I've been working on Ms. Heskey with a list recently of recommendations she will send out. A reprint or a paperback version of a hardcover does not start this period over again. So if Tara's book comes out in paperback in 4 years, it can't win again. It's the original publication date. Most books are published in hardcover first. You also just kind of want to look at, especially on the publisher's webpage, there was a Phyllis Wheatley book that we were looking at. It was actually a repackaging kind of the exact same text from like a book from 1995. It may have a shiny new cover. It's not a new book. So you want to check with the publication date. And so if you opened that book and the copyright, let me find a book real quick. I act like it's going to be hard. Hang on. If you open a book, on this inside page where it tells you lots of information about lots of things, never mind, that one doesn't right there. It's going to have a copyright page and it will say text copyright blank date. It needs to have been within the past 5 years. So right now, I would say 2020 forward for this award. So that Phillis Wheatley book, if you open it up, it may be you may bought it brand new at Amazon that says 2024, but if you look at that text copyright page, it's going to say 1998 because they made no changes. It must be peer reviewed. That is the very nice way of them saying they are not really looking at self-published work. By many self-published work is peer reviewed. But what they mean is like it's gotten reviews in magazines, in literary things. So it's in Booklist, it's in ALA, it's in things like that. Like it is in the zeitgeist of ability to be discussed, of which many self-published things are not. So it is not explicitly non-self-published works, but if you are publishing just to get this award and you're not, publishing it widely and it's not available for critical review, not going to count. And then 6, a contribution to American history for which children are the main audience. So again, lots of things could be read to a child, but whether or not the intended audience of the publisher is children is important. This book must display respect for children's understandings, abilities, and appreciations. Children are defined as persons of ages up to and including 14. Books will be considered for this entire age range. So we've had the Never Caught Ona Judge Young Readers Edition one a couple years ago. That's more for the 14 age range, right? Versus a picture book might win, and that might be more from 5 to 9, right? So it does not have to cover that entire range. It shouldn't, it hopefully doesn't, because it's probably not a good book if it's readable by ages 0 to 14. But it doesn't just have to be a picture book. It doesn't just have to be a chapter book. For the adult criteria, very similar: historical fiction or historically accurate fiction. It can be a really, really good historical fiction novel. Similar period, early colonial, 1607 through Federalist, 1801. Be written in English. For the Adult Book Award, it must be published during the past 5 years, and it explicitly says by a reputable publisher, not self-published. I am not sure how this applies to vanity presses, which are when technically it's a publisher, but you're pay to play. You're paying for them to publish it. Better safe than sorry. Be peer reviewed by someone who is eminently familiar with the subject matter. If it's being published by Oxford Press, they're already sending it out to their peer reviewers, things like that. That is not something you really need to worry about. It's just a connotation to keep in mind. And then be an original contribution to the body of historical knowledge or add new information to previously familiar materials. So the 32nd book on this one thing about Thomas Jefferson is probably not as good of a nominee as the first comprehensive book on the Battle of Saratoga, things like that. So I'm going to put both of these links in the chat. They are available on the Forms website through the historian, under the auspices of the Historian General. The nominations are open now, and you can send your nominating package through the end of December. In each nominating package, so your chapter will decide, and this, you may think it needs to be under the historian, it does not. It can be under literacy promotion, it can be a collaborative effort, is going to include a nomination letter that's basically like filled out application. Yes, I'm nominating. You're going to include a brief synopsis of the book and any awards it's won. So most of the time you can take this from the publisher's information. They write a mean synopsis of the work they are publishing. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You're going to include peer review statements made by at least 3 non-DAR persons familiar with the author's work. So if Kevin's book has on the back of it peer reviews about this specific book that they're quoting, we call them blurbs, you might transpose those and send those. If you find a review in Booklist or Hornbook of Tara's book, you might send those. You do not have to do that outreach and like independently have scholars read Kevin's book and send you reviews. You can find published ones. Usually the publisher will have those available on their website to include. If you happen to know another military historian scholar, then you want to have provide original statement, awesome. A letter of endorsement from the sponsoring DAR chapter or state organization. So your state can nominate a title or the chapter, up to you. That letter of recommendation is going to be like, I am proud to nominate blank, blank, blank. I am nominating it because blank, blank, blank. Thank you for your consideration. You know, you are just going to kind of give a little nuance of what you think is special about this book. And I always recommend how it relates to the criteria, especially that like unique history, unique historical moment, or children's appreciation. A copy of the official application. Again, this is when it was published. This is who it is, et cetera, et cetera. And then 2 copies of the nominated book. So this is the biggest thing. If you are doing budget season, this is a great thing to budget for. When you mail this to Miss Suzanne Heskey or whoever the historian general is in the future, you're going to include 2 copies of the book. That is so it can be reviewed by judges. Might mean you need a thicker envelope, but just keep that in mind. It is 2 copies to go along with it. And then all of this should be, minus the actual book itself, of course, should be no longer than 20 pages. So you do not need to submit a 17-page scholarly essay as a peer review. It should be 1 page or less, ideally. Anne had a great question in the chat about reaching out to me. And yes, you can absolutely reach out to me about these nominations, about this award. I've worked with Mrs. Heskey on putting together a recommendation list for this. I also nominated a winning title a couple of years ago, The History Smashers, American Revolution by Kate Messner. Highly recommend, very fun series. Have yet to nominate a successful adult book, one day. But we are around. This is not, not an award given by the Literacy Promotion Committee, but we think it's really important because the whole point of this book is that it's celebrating the importance of telling history through books, right? It's capturing the importance of literary excellence in these books. And frankly, this award isn't going to textbooks, right? It's going to books that are really nourishing readers and very engaging for readers. And we want to continue seeing that. And then we want to celebrate those authors and give you the chance to talk to them about their books, talk to them about this process, and be even more excited. Maybe now someone's going to reach out about hosting Kevin or Tara for an author event at their chapter or their state. I'm sure they're happy to do that. I'm going to speak for them now. Yes, always, people love to share these book ideas. I always say authors are like the best people to bring for programs because they come ready to speak and very knowledgeable about their things. And the hope is that this book award continues to be a success. Previously, the adult book award winner has been hosted at Congress. I don't believe they did that this year, but I know things are many in flux. Yeah. So we're hoping really as the Literacy Promotion Committee to be that kind of resource. So bringing you here, giving you this chance to hear from them, to learn about the award as part of your process. Kathleen, that is a great question. I am working on figuring out that answer because if you Google the NSDAR Excellence in American History Book Award, you get like 4 web pages, all of which are static and all of which are different, and I'm not sure why. So previous award winners include the 14th Colony, which was about, I lost its state now, Florida, by Mike Bunn like bunny, and her name was Mary Catherine. I know History Smashers, the American Revolution won 1 year. There was one on Thomas Jefferson. I will work on getting that complete list and helping them put it in a place on the website that's not like a secret, apparently, or somewhere you have to know the right code. But yes, obviously, you don't want to nominate a book that has already won. This happened to me the first year I was going to make my nomination. Right before Congress, I was sitting down and I was like, great, I'm going to nominate Never Caught, the Ona Judge Young Readers Edition. The Congress Herald comes out. Guess what book won? And it was great because at least I knew my head was in the right spot. But yes, we'll work on getting that list together so that we can save you the time and money of sending that off. Does anyone have any last questions about this award? It is not a requirement for your chapter to do so, but I will tell you, this is my state secret, so shh. I think they get less than 15 nominations for each a year. So it's a really cool thing to do and like see your like chapter get celebrated, an author probably that you're really passionate about. And like Lauren was saying, like Tara, like she's read for years, like seeing them get this award, celebrating that a book you really enjoyed is up there and that you got to play part of DAR history, right? Like these awards matter, they get recorded, they last, they have a legacy within DAR. So seeing them and seeing your name next to them can be a really exciting thing for your chapter to do, especially if you're not, you know, following up. Lisa, it's not the author. The author can win multiple times, but not the same book. So I can't nominate Kevin's book next year again. Yes, but if Kevin writes a completely different book in 2 years and it qualifies, absolutely. There's no restriction on that. All right. Allison, do you want to take us home? Oh, wait, I forgot the other state secret, our September event. So we are going to be back here next month with another author on September 24th. That's a Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, our usual time. We're going to be joined by Amy K. Runyon, who's a historical fiction author, and she is going to be joining us in collaboration with the Franco-American Memorial Committee to discuss her new book, Mademoiselle I Fell. So it is going to be a fun night of historical fiction, thinking about similar questions like what is your writing process like, researching things like that. But when you're then get a little more freedom, you have a little more of a whimsical story, things like that. So I hope you'll join us then. I'm going to put the link in the chat and hand it over to Allison to close us out.
Hey, Kevin, I want to ask you, how many books have you written?
2.
Of the 2, which is your
Oh,
favorite? and why?
Evidently it started at 6.
Oh, definitely the Complete Victory.
Well, thank you for walking the fields, because I'm sure you did a lot of self-projecting while you were there, thinking about what it must have been like.
Yep. Thank you.
Tara, what about you? How many books have you written?
Sorry, I keep losing my mute button. When you asked that, I was like, oh, I got to count real quick. I did 3 adult electoral college books. I did the adult book about George Washington's views on church and state with a co-author, and then 3 kids books.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm sure the Electoral College book has educated a lot of people, because many people are confused about it. And I want to thank you both
Yeah.
for your education, because writing is hard work. And you know that because you spent a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of late hours toiling over what you did. And we appreciate your efforts. And we're glad DAR was able to reward you for those efforts this year. But keep doing your wonderful work, because years ago when I taught school, one of the sayings I used to have is we can change the world one reader at a time. And we use that in literacy promotion now, but you never know who's going to learn from what you write. And we appreciate the time and effort for your accuracy and for the dedication you put into it to bring real high quality material to your research. And thank you very much for doing that. And for everyone else, thank you so much for coming to spend this time with us tonight. We've really enjoyed doing these spotlights on history, on literacy promotion over the time that we've done it. And we know some of you have been to a lot of them. Some of you may be here for the first time. We hope you'll join us next month. We try to do things that are interesting. We get to know each other a little bit better. And we get to share what DAR is with other people. So thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And Kevin, thank you very much. And Tara, thank you very much. And we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you to Lynn, our tech specialist. We will see you all next month.